this is from Mary. While I generally understand and agree with the concept that addiction is not a disease, definitely not an incurable disease or lifelong condition, and the substances are not addicting, quotes, I do question whether opioid use disorder is somewhat unique and might require a more lifelong medication-based treatment approach. I'm just looking at this article, which states studies have shown that fewer than 10% of persons with opioid addiction are able to achieve long-term abstinence without medication-assisted treatment with methadone or buprenorphine maintenance. No behavioral cognitive treatments alone have been shown to be effective for patients with opioid addiction or severe OUD. And research over the past 50 years shows that the most critical need in the treatment of opioid addiction is the continued and expanded availability of treatment with long-acting, steady-state medication. Research has documented that a relative endorphin deficiency. I'm just laughing because I know where to go with this.
Here now?
Yeah. But basically, just to make it the most of that was her quoting an article and wondering, how do you guys address this?
Well, let's start it. People outgrow narcotics all the time. The most famous the original study on maturing out was 1963 by Charles Winnick. It's how I got into the addiction field, where he pointed out from 2/3 to 3/4 of the known inner city heroin addicts in New York ceased to be heroin addicts over a period of 10 to 12 years, from their early 20s to their early 30s. The original outgrowing addiction comes from narcotics. I talked about temperance, but we made narcotics in the form of heroin the sine qua non of addiction. And everything that she says is wrong. Most people change and shift their narcotics patterns. Most people outgrow it. Even inner city addicts outgrow it. But of course, people with more to lose, like physicians, regularly quit narcotic addictions. And we know that. And how do we know that? Everybody's taken an opioid. One of my best routines, of course, is to go into a room where everybody's been taught that if you take narcotics, you're inevitably addicted to them. And I say, how many people here have taken an opioid painkiller? And everybody in the room raises their hand. And then I say, how many became addicted? And nobody raises their hand. I say, well, maybe that's too difficult of a question. Did any of you really feel an appeal of the drug and feel like I'd like to take more? And then people raise their hand and I say, did you keep taking it? And they said, well, no. I had to go to work. I have a family, for God's sake. I have children. I have a husband or a wife. I wasn't going to do that. And where was I going to get them? Go out and score it on the street anyhow? Everybody's had a personal experience with the drug that is supposed to be inevitably addictive, and it's not. And then that goes back to, while I was writing Love and Addiction, the Vietnam experience was occurring. There was massive addiction to pure opioids. And when they came back to the United States, over 90% of the men kicked. If you read Love and Addiction, we quote Richard Wilbur, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Medicine and Environment. And he said, everything I learned in medical school about narcotic addiction was proven wrong to me by the Vietnam experience. And this woman, who's sympathetic towards us, is recreating everything that he learned that was wrong in medical school, which is still taught in medical school. It's an example of how we can never overcome. It's more than ignorance. It's a theory. It's a philosophy. It's part of how our mental baggage as Americans and about addiction that has to be broken down. Even people quite close to me say, well, yes, but if you take heroin, you have to become addicted. So she's wrong that people don't get over it. We've known about that from Vietnam. We've known about that from Charles Winnick. Of course, Rat Park shows that animals addicted to morphine solution cease to be addicted when they're put in Rat Park, when they can screw around with other rats and run around the Ferris wheel and have a lot of space. It's that idea is continuing to be sold as we began this our talk about MAT on by people who say, well, you have to keep taking methadone and buprenorphine forever, which isn't going to happen for most people. And then what happens? And our good colleague, I wish he was here, Aaron Ferguson, says remarkably large percentage of people on MAT wean themselves from it. They know themselves that they're capable of overcoming the drug, and they do so on their own. So our good friend, Mary, thanks for being on our team. There's a basic block in your thinking. I don't fault you for having it. It's fundamental. It's wrong. It's actually been done away with in many cases. There's no separate category for addiction and opioids in DSM-5. They don't say, oh, addiction, opioids, never get over it, people never change. That's not in there. They have a criteria of, do you cease having problems no matter what drug you're using? Yeah. And, you know, my quiz question is, DSM-5 applies the word addiction to one thing in the whole universe. And then I say to people, what's that thing? And they guessed sex or video games, but for some reason DSM-5 decided those weren't addictive. The one thing that DSM-5 calls addictive is gambling. Mm. And it's sort of the sine qua non, that has to be the reductio ad absurdum of insanity. There's one thing in the universe that's addictive, and it's not what used to be addictive, narcotics, and it's not what a lot of people think of as addictive, like that are narcotics, like sex and gaming, which the International Classification of Diseases calls addictive. It's gambling. Huh, who would have guessed? Shows how arbitrary that whole operation is.
And there's another aspect I'll just tackle real quick that, you know, most of that was a quote. So Mary's saying the fundamental question is, everything you're saying makes sense. Why is it that I'm reading this thing that seems also to make sense that's saying all this stuff about opioids? And
well, I hope everything gets into her classroom, she
argues
vociferously against it.
So one of the assumptions made there too, in addition to everything you said, even in the literature itself, whatever obstacles they're going through to make opioids the more addictive thing, or opioids addictive where other things aren't, they mentioned that what does it say? I mentioned that some percentage of people aren't able to abstain from one thing or another, and so of course there's a sampling bias there. They're probably looking at a certain group of people for a certain amount of time, and there's also the target is abstinence, and that, as you and I mentioned, that can't just be the goal. I mean, maybe you want people to kick a certain type of drug, maybe you don't. What do they want? And I think that's what's missing from just about every piece of literature that we have on drugs and addiction and programs to address it.
And we want people to lead a full life. Mm. And the argument she's making or she's describing, and for MAT is, well, at least if you take methadone, you can lead a full life, which that's not 100% true. You know, you're going to have to go get your methadone. You're going to have to apply for it. You're going to have to get it somewhere. You're going to have some severe restrictions on your life. And, you know, that's for you to decide whether that's your best way to go. And LPP and with Aaron Ferguson, we leave that decisions the person's. We tell them that people can kick. They do all the time. Whether you choose to, whether you want to, we'll leave you to decide that. But it's not the case that any group of people is unable to abstain from any drug as the course of their life changes. And people themselves are stunned to learn. And of course, the best example of that is smoking, where people feel they can't exist without it. And then they kick.